I want to invite Matt Moberg to the stage. Let's give him a rousing round of applause.
All right, here we go. Okay, sweet. I wish I would have submitted. I like that song. That was good. It's like you knew me already. Good evening, you guys. It's good to be in this space. Can you give it up for the first family of Minnesota? That is a power couple right there. We're all better because we have them in our midst. As a means of trying to establish a little familiarity with you, my name is Matt Moberg. This is my family right here. Come on now, you guys. Thank you. Don't clap. Don't feel bad about it. That's me right there, that guy. On my back is my hairy son named Wyatt. To my right, your left, that is Sawyer. We call him soy sauce. He claims to love the Lord. We have yet to see the fruits of that. And then over there is my wife, my rock, Lauren. Speaking of which, by rock, you don't judge the absence of a bicep definition there. I was not flexing, okay? It's a lot rockier than that image would lead you to believe. Dr. Nakima Levy-Pounds asked if I would step up on this stage tonight, and I do not feel worthy to do so. When I look out in this room, especially after that spoken word, this is not a space where I belong. I do not have the substance, the history, the track record that warrants me being here. Yet, if I can use this space the next few minutes, I want to share with you what it was, the moment that I held that woke me up to the need to give my life to the work of anti-racism and pursuing racial justice. And the moment for me that was a catalytic moment, is also a very painful moment for our city. On November 15th, 2015, 2 years ago, a young man who had only walked the earth for 24 years of his life was taken from our city in the span of 61 seconds. At 24 years old, the blue bullets of the Minneapolis Police Department broke through the black body of Jamar Clark, adding another name to a long list that would only grow over the years of young black men that were killed at the hands of those who swore and who were paid to protect them. Over the 18 days that followed that space and that tragic event, outside of the precinct, our city watched those streets become a base camp for freedom fighters, for leaders like Dr. Nakima Levy-Pounds, who led us into that space and who demanded with dignity and grace that the truth come out and the truth be told. Despite the portrayals of the precinct in the media that held the protesters under trial as if the trial wasn't for the police, as a pastor who has gone to many different churches and many different sacred spaces, I can tell you right now that the time I had on those streets with many of you was the holiest ground my feet have ever touched. I've never seen anything like it before. Next to many of you, I learned firsthand that every lament really is a love song. I learned firsthand that beliefs only matter so much until the fact of the matter comes down to, what are you willing to bleed for? What are you willing to give your life over to? Had it not been so flipping cold on those nights, I would have taken off my shoes because my feet have never touched holy ground like that before. And I don't know that they ever will again. And I remember specifically feeling that way about that space because I remember being afraid that I never get to share it with you again. 8 days after the death of Jamar Clark, 4 white men walked into that crowd and fired off 8 shots, hitting 5 bodies of peaceful protesters. I wasn't there that night. I was there 5 of the previous 7 nights, but on the 8th night I was at home watching Cars 2 with my youngest son. And you can imagine then my surprise that when I woke up the next morning, somebody was saying otherwise. At about 6:30 in the morning, I woke up to my phone violently shaking with missed calls and messages saying and asking, Matt, why would you do what apparently I had done? Word reached that all of a sudden, I found out through these missed calls and through all these messages that the protesters had been shot and that I indeed was the shooter. How did that happen? This right here. photo went out into the World Wide Web, into the social media atmosphere, asking, who is this man? Is he involved with the shootings that went down last night? That man right there, by the way, is me. So I woke up, and I'll tell you this, as a pastor, and as many of you are leaders, I'm sure you can understand that when somebody puts your face out there on social media and maybe talks a little noise around it, it is what it is. Obviously not ideal, but it's a moment that you can manage and move on. You can deal with it and get over with it. The problem is that it wasn't just somebody that put up this picture. The person who posed that picture was a man by the name of Sean King, who has about 923,000 followers, 923,000 followers who are all too quick and willing to pass that photo along to their thousands of followers. And so before I even had my morning coffee, I was well aware that there was at least 1 million people trying to figure out who is this white guy and what did he do the night before. Needless to say, I was a little shook. I got a little anxious, and I got a little scared, and then I got a little sad. And as I was trying to parse out these different feelings and the different reactions, and trying to find some sense of stability, some sense of grounding, trying to understand where do I really go from here, I found myself getting really angry. And I found myself getting really defensive. And I found myself wondering why this would happen to me, of all people. I mean, I am somebody who not only voted for Obama not once but twice, but I knocked on doors for Obama. I had roots saved on my DVR. Everybody knew that I was reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' latest books because every time I picked up that book, I took a photo of it and put it on an Instagram for everybody to see. I understand there are a lot of bigots in our city, and there are a lot of people who would be likely suspects for doing something as stupid as they did that night, but I did not fit the profile of that man. And so I was pissed off, and I was starting to panic. And I called one of my friends, one of my favorite leaders in our city, Pastor D. McIntosh, and I proceeded to emotionally vomit all over D. And D, being the pastor, and being the friend that she is, she allowed it to happen. She calmly and collectively kind of walked me through what the next steps would look like, how we could find a way forward inside of this, and perhaps bring some clarity. And for all the goodness and kindness and grace that she brought to me, I failed to return the favor. At the end of the phone call, I said something that for the past 2 years, I've been trying to forget and have failed to do so thus far. I said, D, I understand that people are upset. I understand that it's getting intense out there. I understand that the anger is palpable. But how are you going to make me a suspect just because of the way that I look? And in Dee's silence, I heard a lot. My story started to speak up in that moment right there. And in Dee's silence, I started to recognize some things that I've been running from. I started to see some things that I've been trying to hide from. I started to know some things that I didn't want to know. And despite my best of efforts to be angry, defensive, push away, and despite all of my tripping over Sean King's tweet, I realized in that moment that he wasn't wrong. I realized that there was some truth in that tweet. Because while I was not with those boys on that night, that didn't really matter. While my fingers never did touch that trigger, I knew that I was still responsible for loading that gun. I've been doing it since the day I was born. With every explicit and implicit, conscious and subconscious act that I have committed, bent on figuring out what is my intention as opposed to asking what is the impact, that was me loading the gun. With every night that I watched the nightly news, as I listened to white news anchors talk about black pain and never have the nerve to ask, are you qualified to do so? That was me loading that gun. From kindergarten to college, from only seeing white teachers in front of the class And me never wondering or saying out loud, am I missing a voice inside of my educational process here? That's me loading the gun. With every racist joke that slipped by me and slipped out of me in silence. When the punchline punched everyone but me, loudly. That was me loading the gun. With every protest that I showed up at, with a cape on my back and a question in my hands of what can I as a white person do, as opposed to a confession out of my mouth that's saying, what have I as a white person done? Well, that's me loading the gun. For every friend of color that I've called on the phone, like Dee that morning, where I asked her, no, I'd say I demanded of her to prioritize my feelings over her own oppression. As if that wasn't the very thing that was perpetuating the epidemic of white supremacy in the first place. That was me loading the gun. Please beware of white boys who believe that they are woke. Watch out for them. Because what we tend to do is we show up at a precinct under the guise of protest, but we're there just to perform. We want everyone to be our friend, but we are kind of indifferent about whether or not everyone is free. Yeah, we're loud about racism, we're loud about racists, but those out there, not this one in here. I sat at my table, you guys, that morning for hours, feeling paralyzed. Because there's a question that came with this photo. It was a question that asked, has anybody seen this man? For the first time in my life, I recognized that I hadn't. I didn't know. I didn't know that I'd been loading a gun and weaponizing my whiteness every hour of every day that it went on unexamined. Beware of white boys who believe that they are woke, and yet they don't have the audacity to recognize that they first were asleep. My racial awareness, if you will, began in that moment right there. Not when I all of a sudden ran into new information, but when I can no longer outrun my own implication. When I can no longer scrub all the blood off of my hands. And as these things were being passed around, as this photo was now going viral amongst different people, and rightfully so, we're all concerned. We're all trying to figure out the identity. As that is going around, I recognized I only had one thing I could do. I had to turn myself in. I had to let go of the facade, let go of the mask. I had to be honest. I had to come clean. I had to stop loading that gun. I had to set it down. See, white supremacy is this invisible power that perpetuates the disparities, and we know about the disparities all too well here in Minneapolis. Our city is the second worst city when it comes to racial disparities in this country, and for so long I have found that pain to be profitable, and I didn't have the courage to name it as so. I've always been the shooter, and I've never been the shot. Everything changes, though, when you let the gun sit down. It's less invisible at that point. Over the past 2 years, as I've tried to do this work with our community at the table, and with my own life and my friends and my network, we have stumbled and we have screwed up and we've looked like idiots, but we've refused to stop because of so. We can't, there's too much at stake. And so we've kept moving forward, and we've kept going longer, and we've kept going further, and we've taken some hits because of so. And I can tell you that white supremacy, how palpable the powers of racism are here in our city, it looks a lot less invisible when you're on this side of the gun as opposed to that side of the gun. For our community in and of itself, for the past 2 years, we have had thousands and thousands of dollars taken away from us. I've had friends that I've known since childhood who will no longer talk to me. I have family members that raised me as a baby that will no longer speak with me. I have people in our community that left our church under the grounds of Matt Moberg as a divisive leader who spits hateful rhetoric because he is more concerned about founding a community on Black Lives Matter than he is about founding a community on Jesus Christ. And then I had this one right here from a couple of weeks ago, where we were standing in front of a light rail, and there was a live stream that was capturing the whole moment. And the moment that the live stream focused on us white folk who were out there witnessing the brilliance and the courageous of these young black activists who were laying their bodies on their line for a city that refused to do the same for them. The moment that the cameras and the live stream focused on us, people from the white parts of town started to chirp up. They said things like, "Run them over," "Traitors," "What are our clergy doing out there?" And then one line in particular that really messed me up. "Aren't they on our side?" I've received a lot of different words in the past. I've received death threats from Klansmen, even on Twitter. But there's something about that that is painful and as frustrating, as ignorant as it is. It gave me hope. My hope was that the same kind of silence that hovered over my own ignorance and my own collision with reality, and that own space where I had to step forward and recognize that there's a lot of healing that can happen in a space like that. Not just from running into new information, but when you can no longer outrun your own implication. My prayer and my hope is that we all, especially us white folk, would come to that place where we have no choice but to sober up and recognize how dirty our hands have been. We cannot wake up until we first realize that we have been fast asleep. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it.